Righto guys, continuing the build log. As you can see, the spars have all been put in. I've used the offcut through the centre to make it into an A spar. It makes a lot more stiffness for not much weight. You should have two sets of offcuts depending on how you put your lid on. The smaller offcuts will be from the bottom, obviously. You don't need to use those. And I've just used the same method of cutting out a groove with a snap razor and gluing in the spar with hot glue. Hot glue looks a lot better if it's on white foam. On the black foam it looks pretty horrible. So if you're going to use it on a black EPP wing, you probably want to be a bit more careful than I was. So it looks a bit better. Next job is to cut in the motor mount. Depending on how much weight you're running, how big a battery, and if you're running a GoPro, you might need to cut the motor mount forwards a little bit to get the CG a bit easier. But because I'm running the GoPro all the way out the front, I figure that I don't need to cut it in at all. If anything, it'll be nose heavy. So you can't really see on the black EPP there, but I just use a snap razor. I just cut out a cutout straight through the back of the plane. I don't remove foam and then glue it back in. I just cut a slot, and the slot wants to be parallel with the bottom of the airfoil. And even then it might need a little tweak upwards to be in line with the trim of the elevon. But for starters, I'll just run it flat with the bottom of the airfoil. It does push the foam out a tiny bit just because of the thickness of the motor mount itself, but I don't know, if you wanted it absolutely perfect, I suppose you'd have to cut out foam or melt the foam wide enough, but it's pretty good, so it's definitely good enough for me. I'm just holding the slot open with a few offcuts of sparring and a bit of Gorilla Glue and water down in the slot. Mix it all up and slide the motor mount back and forth a few times, make sure it's covered, and then a whole bunch of pins and leave it to set overnight. You probably need pliers to pull the pins out with all that Gorilla Glue. Make sure it's parallel with the cutout. It's probably a bit late if you've buggered that up, but it's nice to double check it. Ready to start the laminate. I found this is the best way to set out the laminate so you don't waste any. I've set just a normal clothes iron to synthetic about halfway. You don't want it too hot because you can melt the foam underneath the lamb, and you can also warp the wing if you put it down too hot. Trusty snap razor does every job. So as you can see, the offcut will fit perfectly on the other side, so there's no wastage. That way you can keep your leftover lamb for patch up jobs, or if you need to re-laminate, you can keep it for that. I'm not going to fast forward this laminating because the timing is, I want to emphasize how slow you need to do it. If you try and do it too fast, you are going to warp the wing. It'll come out looking like a banana. It's also important as you're going to check along the leading edge and the trailing edge to make sure that you haven't warped the wing. And if you've laminated one side and you realise that you've warped it, you need to try and warp it back the other way when you put the other side of laminate on. But your best bet is to just take it easy, do it slowly, and you should have no dramas. Don't worry too much if it doesn't attach on the coroplast very well, as the main element of the strength comes through stiffening the wings themselves. So now that you've done one side, it's all the same top and bottom. I usually like to do the top first and then the bottom can wrap around. Makes it a bit more weatherproof. Once you've got the laminate done, it's time to set out your elevons. You can use almost anything to cut it. It's fairly cuttable wood. Hey little man, it's alright. You can use a snap razor, you can use a saw. Dremel's pretty easy. And there's nothing scientific about it really. It just makes sense to trim off a bit on the inside of the elevon so it doesn't work against itself in a roll, create too much drag, that sort of thing. Anyway, stay tuned, the next episode will be online soon.